Good evening, and welcome along to our weekly review of the US markets brought to you by SG Futures. This is Sunday, the 18th of October, just going up to 7 in the evening GMT. I want to just do our usual walkthrough of what happened last week across mainly the E-mini S&P 500 with some nuances from NASDAQ and the Russell, and hopefully what we can expect next week, followed by our outlook on some of the bigger stocks out there. So coming into this week, we talked last week about the inverted head and shoulders pattern that was going on a number of the US markets, the mini S&P, the NASDAQ, the Russell, the Dow, and that it had resolved itself. And when we came in on Monday, we had a significant gap higher. So futures were all higher overnight on the Monday. And it's given us this weekly high up here, which we've drawn a trend line off, and we're going to just see how this trend line develops as the week progresses. But as the week unfolded, things got a little bit more bearish, and then on Thursday we had a really interesting day on Thursday where we talked about this on Twitter, where the cash market gapped down by 40-50 handles, and we literally rallied straight up all day long, which is very significant in the context of what I thought would be a little bit of a more bearish week. Then on Friday we had it started off quite positive, and then we had just a bit of a late day sell-off, led by a lot of the tech stocks across the NASDAQ. So the NASDAQ actually closed a lot lower than the E-mini S&P. Given that the NASDAQ tends to drive a lot of the performance or give some direction to the E-mini S&P, that's something we do want to think about. It's not giving a huge amount of context right now, but it's something that's just going to tick away in the back of our minds for the time being. So this is how we look like in a daily candlestick chart. I've taken out all of the overnight future sessions, so these are all just the cash sessions over the course of last week. When we go in and look at the first thing we'll usually do coming in on a Sunday is we look at our E-mini S&P weekly view. And this is a view of the weekly profile charts. Now, I talked a lot about this last week, and we talked about this particular profile in here, which was the week before. And we talked about that there was a number of low volume nodes on this. There was a gap in this, which was a little bit ugly. And it was our hypothesis that we would explore into this a little bit. We actually felt that it would probably go down a bit further and explore towards the 3400 range. But we really only got into sort of halfway down the profile chart into the previous week's value area high, and we rebounded back with a little bit of a late in the week sell-off. We closed in the lower half of value in the weekly profile. Coming into this week, we're still interested in this particular part of the profile down here from a weekly point of view. There's quite a high volume node in here which I'm interested in, which I think could act as support, and that will correspond to just below 3400 on the chart. So I expect us to come in and explore this a little bit. I won't be shocked if we don't, given how bullish the market has been. But given how light the volume was last week, I do expect that to continue. To give you some context, we're not overly bullish or bearish on this market at the moment. We're 3 weeks out from a general election. We're probably leaning more towards the long side than the short side, but we're not overly committed either way. And we're working very short-term trades on a day trading perspective, and we have relatively tight stops, so we can just get in and we can get out. There's no longer term swing play in here at the moment. But coming into next week, I expect volatility to continue. If the low volume continues, we may see an exploration into this particular box down here, into this area here. And if some of the key levels in here break, we could see some further downside down to the sort of 33.40, 33.35 sort of level, where you've got previous high volume nodes. So high volume nodes suggest that we spent a lot of time and we transacted a lot of volume in these areas. So they're areas that could potentially act as support or some pit stops on the way down perhaps. So that's things from a weekly point of view. What's also worth noting just on the upside is I'm really interested in this particular profile over here. So I'll just draw that in there. And I'm also interested in what's above this particular level here. So I'm just marking it out on the box right now. But we have a very high volume node in here. We have a high volume node over here. And we traded quite a lot of volume in the value area last week, and pretty much above last week's value area high. To me, it feels like thin air, and I think if we break above that, we'll definitely see 3,600 before the end of the week. Do I think it's probable? I don't think it's too probable, but I think if we get any kind of decent bullish sentiment or any kind of a trending day up, I think it is possible that we explore into this area a little bit more, because this profile over here is a profile that hasn't been terribly well filled out or explored, and it would be logical that we would spend some time exploring this sort of range, 3,600 down to about 3,520. I think that's the next stop for the market if we're going to continue with the bullish sentiment. So let's jump across into the daily profile. When we jump into the daily profile, we had a really, really interesting week, as I said. So we came into the week on Monday, and we'd a pretty significant gap up from Friday from the cash market, and we closed pretty much on the highs, and we printed the weekly highs in this profile in here. And over the rest of the week, we sort of dripped further to the downside. We had an inside day on Tuesday, and that typically will correspond with where we've got quite a strong trend day up. We typically get an inside day the following day where we fill out some pretty thin areas in the profile from Monday, and that's exactly what happened. And this is what market profile tells you. You look at a candlestick chart, you'll never see this. Then we went into Wednesday. We initially looked pretty bullish. We failed at Tuesday's value area high, and then we sold off, and we had a little bit of accumulation down near the lower end of the profile below the previous 2 days' lows. But probably the most interesting day was Thursday, and I can't remember exactly, but I think there was some news overnight, and we looked at a very, very significant gap to the downside. And if I remember rightly, this was led by a pretty significant sell-off across European equities, and we opened all the way down here, and this was a 40-odd point gap down. And I wrote on Twitter that it would be very unlikely that we would fill this gap to the upside, and that's exactly what we did. We very briefly explored to the downside, but then we literally trended all the way up, and we closed on or near the highs, which again is important MGI to carry forward for the people who've got market profile OCD and who have OCD for gaps in markets. This particular gap between the previous Thursday and Friday was filled during a cash session, which is something that's pretty rare, and it was pretty nice to see. But then on Friday, we opened up here, we had a slight gap higher, we explored into Tuesday's value area, we failed at Tuesday's value area, and then we came off, and then we closed pretty much on the lows. And when we look at the NASDAQ in particular, the NASDAQ really seemed to drag this particular market down. But looking at Thursday in particular, it was a really, really interesting day when all of the components of our market profile course or our level up sessions really came together. And it's when we look at our things like our tick, our advanced decline line, and our breadth. So there are market internals. They really gave no indication that on Thursday when we opened that we were going to sell off all day, that it was very highly probable that the low of the day could be in within the first 30 minutes. And Peter Resnicek in Shadow Trader has done quite a good video around this already, so I recommend you checking that out. And he talks about the level of the tick never really suggested that there were going to be any significant sellers coming in, and we were very unlikely to sell off. So you could have a lot of confidence in your longs. So if you got long and you got long early, you could have confidence that you could have carried this for the vast majority of the day and made some pretty decent money out of it. So I definitely recommend you go and check that out. So from this week's point of view, What I am quite interested in, I'll get into the proper nuance of the profile in a moment. I'm interested in this low volume node down here, which corresponds to the profile from Wednesday, the 7th of October. There are some single prints down here, and I think there's a good probability that they will be filled. Our hypothesis from last week, looking at it from a weekly point of view, that we would come down and we would test these areas and repair these areas. I think that's still valid. I think there's a good opportunity that we do that. It just might take the right bit of volatility to get it down there, and with light enough volume, we might see it. So these would be areas that I would be looking at potentially to maybe pivot a short-term long off if we can get the right downside momentum to pick that up. I potentially see a low of around about 33.94. 33.95 would be sort of the exact sort of levels that I would be looking at for a potential long. And again, like the internals would need to support this. And when I talk about the internals supporting it, the internals give you a real idea of what's going on in the market at that very point in time. Which stocks are advancing, which are declining, the ratio between the two. Where's the up volume minus the down volume going to? So are we positive or negative from a buying and selling volume point of view? And also the tick. So which stocks are ticking up and which are ticking down? And that's done across the whole index. And those three readings between the Nasdaq and the NYSE, they give you a real good indication as to whether there's going to be validity in your trade or not. So I recommend you really get out and try and find out as much as you can about internals. We covered off in our market profile course, our level up sessions. But I'd really recommend that you try and get a hold of some decent internals for you to work off, because they'll really support your trading going forward. So we'll just quickly jump into our ES. So this is our the main profile chart that we work off. Let's just jump back to Friday. So we can see on Friday, that's this profile over here. So we opened with the gap up from Thursday into Friday. This is the Globex session over here. We gapped higher. We explored into Tuesday's value area. So we got really only a couple of ticks into it. We filled out the single prints from Monday. So again, they seem pretty relevant and they seem pretty important. So again, single prints are always things we look at. They're always in the back of our minds. And then we failed, and then we came back down. We tested it in B period, and we got 3 ticks of excess in C period. And the fact that there was 21 contracts traded hands there, that was a tell that we were probably printing the high of the day at that point. And then when we moved down, we had during the settlement, which is M and N period, there's a lot of singles, a fair amount of what would ordinarily look like emotion, but given that it's during settlement, I don't put too much weighting on this. This could be just, it's the end of the week, we've gapped higher. This could be traders just taking some profits, taking some contracts off the table. To be honest, we don't really know, and we'll only really find out when the futures open in a few hours' time as to how bearish that sentiment actually was and how much it's going to carry through into this week. So we've closed down here. But when we look at some of the nuances down here, when I talked about the low volume node on the previous profile, let me just get down to it here. This is the area that I'm talking about here. So the area filled out in purple. And these are some single prints, and they date back to the 6th of October. And it's an area in which there was quite a bit of emotion within this particular part of the profile. It was some stops going off, and it drove the market higher, and then when it came down to retest it, it never filled these in, which on the day is a very, very bullish indicator. But with single prints, you'll always expect that at some point you're going to come back and retest them to ensure that these prices were properly auctioned. We always treat single prints like a gap in the market, and this is absolutely no different, except it just happens during the cash market hours. So I expect this to be a potential area of interest. I think the value area high over here from Monday the 5th of October. I think we've got a couple of VPOCs down here, so a couple of value areas that we'd be interested in. So this is a whole range between 33.94 right up to about 34.02 that I'm really interested in, and how far down does it actually go. So this would be a potential launch pad for some longs, provided the internals will support it, and we would be targeting probably the upper end of the profile from a daily point of view. So that's everything from the ES. What we've also got on the slate this week is we have some earnings. So we have Netflix and Tesla are probably the biggest ones that are coming out this week. They're after hours on Tuesday for Netflix and after hours on Wednesday for Tesla. These can be quite a bit of fun to trade during settlement after hours on the NASDAQ. I had quite a bit of fun in prop trading doing those, depending on which way they go. But these would be a really good indication of how the big tech firms are doing and how the rest of this earnings season is likely to pan out. So we'll be watching those two with an awful lot of interest. Just onto some stocks now quickly. And I'm going to start with Microsoft. Microsoft, we had a little bit of a balancing week. So we last Friday to Monday, we gapped higher. We traded higher on Monday. Up to the previous support over here from August. It was capped out there, and then on Tuesday we traded higher again into that particular value area, and we failed, and has come off ever since. Friday saw a little bit of support and a little bit of buying. I feel like given this gap has actually filled, I think with the right positive news around the NASDAQ and some of the other tech earnings that are coming out this week, we could see 235 trade in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So that's one we're kind of watching with interest. Any sort of sell-off down to the sort of 210, 212 area, we would look at that as a buying opportunity. Now looking at Netflix as we come into the earnings for Netflix, this was quite an interesting week. The previous week, last week, was very much a balancing week. The previous week, and this week we explored into some new all-time highs on Wednesday, but we closed on the lows, so we had real failure up here, and it should be expected that when we fail up here, we should be targeting this distance, so between 535 and roughly 572. We take that distance and we put it down here. So it would not shock me if, depending on how the earnings go or the run up to earnings, that we trade we might tick below the 500 handle. So that's one we're looking at it with interest, and we would look at any sort of movement below the $500 mark as being potentially viable and something to maybe pivot along off. So potentially some opportunity there. We closed on the lows on Friday, which is again some good MGI to carry forward. Where do we open on Monday, and what does Monday's profile look like? I think it'll be a real big indicator, given that they are reporting on Tuesday evening. Then we'll look into Amazon. Now Amazon suffered greatly on Friday. Bit of a negative reaction to Prime Day, but the Friday profile is really, really interesting. We briefly ticked down to 3160 on the chart, but it was snapped up quickly. So it is safe to say there are some real serious buyers in this particular zone down here. I think it's safe to say that there's some pretty decent buyers down here. This is a full big balance area down here. We looked into it and we failed. So I think any type of dip down towards 32.20 would be considered a buy. We bought it at 31.80. We were pretty much out almost like an hour or two later, and we took our profit on it. But we mentioned on Twitter that anything down to the sort of 31.80 mark would represent good value. And on Friday we got a bit of a surprise opportunity on that one. So that's one to look at. Then finally, just a quick look at Apple. Apple reported a new release of the iPhone 12 and a couple of other products this week. Sort of not greatly received across the market, I think it's fair to say. We closed on the lows on Friday. We left some single prints up here, which we think should be filled. But you'll notice on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we didn't move from a closing price point of view, despite what happened throughout the day. We failed up around the 125 mark, but pretty much our value stayed constant across the 3 days, with a little bit of a dip on Friday. We think any sort of sell-off into the sort of 115, 116 handle would be a potential area to pivot long off. Again, with all of these stocks and with all of these trades, we're conscious of the overall macro view of the US election coming in 3 weeks and the various different outcomes that may present. So these are always things that we're keeping at the back of our minds. If it trades down to 115, it's not something we throw the house at, but it could be a potential for a short-term swing trade to pick up a couple of bucks on a few units. So that's pretty much it from SG Futures this week on our weekly markets review. Thanks so much for watching and happy trading this week. Good luck.